Welcome to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking with Sue-Maree Wilks about walking the Cape to Cape Trail. During COVID times, parkrun was stopped for a little while, and at that time, Sue-Maree and a friend started hiking the trails around Collie. And they hiked around for at least a year before they had to repeat the trails that they were hiking on. Just shows how many trails there are around Collie, which is fantastic. When parkrun returned, they loved it so much they kept on hiking, just changed the day from Saturday to a Sunday, and then looked for bigger challenges. And one of those challenges was the Great Ocean Road, and the other was the Cape to Cape. Welcome to Forest.chat, Sue-Maree.
Thanks so much, Paul. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. Hiking. So you can hike all over the place, and you've done quite a lot around Collie. You probably know that place like the back of your hand. But we're here today to talk about the Cape to Cape Trail. What is the Cape to Cape Trail?
So the Cape to Cape Trail is a hiking trail that goes from Cape Naturalist down to Cape Leeuwin. So it starts out of Dunsborough and basically finishes in Augusta. It is 123 kilometres according to the books, although we found that it was a little bit further than that when we did it. It's mostly on trail. There are a few sealed parts to it, but a lot of it is on rocky single paths or on beach sand or up in the sandhills, which is also a little bit different.
Yeah, and it's beautiful coastline there.
It is absolutely stunning. I think that's what we really noticed is you see some beautiful pictures of different spots down south, but what you don't realise is that it's all beautiful. Every time we went around another headland, there'd be another beautiful beach in front of us or another stunning rock formation or a gorge or something else to look at. So it was just consistently beautiful.
Amazing. And I gather there's also a couple of river crossings along the way?
There are. So we had 2 river crossings that we had to do. There are a few more that were a little bit weighty, but we didn't need to take shoes off. You could sort of rock hop across. But I think it depends on the time of year, but you'll definitely get wet at least a couple of times.
So when we talk later on, there'll be something about when's a good time to do that exactly.
I think there are certainly times where you're going to stay a little drier than others, so we can chat about that.
Excellent. So 123 kilometres and you're hiking, like how far do you go in a day?
So that depends on what you plan for. So we did it over 6 days, so looking at between 20 and 25 kilometres a day. You can do it in as few as 4 days, or some people will take up to 10, depending on how far you do want to go each day.
Right. So that's a speed, endurance and time availability.
That's right.
Thing that you need to work out for yourself.
That's right, yes.
Sue-Maree, what does it take you to do a hike like the Cape to Cape Trail?
Well, I think you've got to start off with a reason to be doing the bigger hikes. And for me, that tends to be curiosity. I always want to know what's out there. So that level of curiosity is a good starting place. You also want to have like-minded friends if you're going with other people. So people who have the same idea about hiking as you do. If you have friends who are happy to take that time out of their busy lives, because it does take some time. You want to have similar goals. So you're going to be walking at the pace of the slowest person in your group. So it helps if you're all at a similar pace, or if not, that you're happy to slow it down. If you've got someone who wants to rush through in a few hours and then someone who wants a more leisurely stroll, it could be a bit difficult.
That, or I guess you meet up with them at the end of the day.
Well, there is that, but it does kind of defeat the purpose a little bit if you stretch out too far. You do also need a reasonable level of fitness. It's quite hard, I think, to back up day after day. So being able to go out and do a hike of 15 to 20 Ks in one day is really good. But having to do that over and over again, and often on quite different terrains, you want to know that you are prepared for that at least. So I would recommend that you'd need to be getting some kilometres in under your feet before you head off.
And is there a bit of psychology around that as well?
There can be. I think hiking is quite different in that you do go through a lot of emotions when you're out on the trail. So much of it is beautiful and stunning and awe-inspiring, but at other times it can be quite a drudge as you're trudging along through the sand and wondering how long this beach is going to last, or up through another sandhill. So it's not all roses and it's not all that feeling of euphoria. A lot of it is, but you do need that mental ability, I think, to be able to push on when things are, is that a blister that I'm getting? Is that, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable? Gee, it's hot. To work through those and then enjoy the beautiful side of hiking. I think the other thing that you need to have in your head before you start is what you want to get out of it. So for us, for this time, we had friends from Queensland who came and hiked with us, some of the same friends who'd done a previous hike with us. So this was, for one of them, her first time to WA. So we wanted to balance our hike with a bit of tourism. So we didn't want to do too much hiking each day and not leave enough time in the afternoon. But if you wanted to push on further, if you were a local and didn't want those tourism options, then I guess that's something to consider early on. So knowing what you want to get out of the hike is important.
Yeah, sharing it with others, and especially when they're on a voyage of discovery, never having been there before, yeah, very important to be able to pick up those little bits that you wouldn't normally do on your own.
That's right. And we were able to, so we aimed to finish at about 2:30 most days. We'd start hiking at 8 in the morning and aim to be finished mid-afternoon. So we were able to do a cave tour, some wineries, the lighthouse tour, all questionable things to be doing after you've already walked 20 Ks, to throw in another 600 steps or so. But it was worthwhile. We went to Simo's a few times, did a few other an afternoon down at Canal Rocks. So it was nice to be able to fit those in.
And Simo's is an ice creamery, right?
It is the most amazing ice creamery in the world.
And it's right there partway along the...
Absolutely. I think we made it 3 times to Simo's.
Fantastic.
We liked it so much. So I guess something else it takes then is to be able to be flexible. It's really hard, regardless of what time of year you plan for, to know what the weather's going to do. And they always say that there's no bad weather, there's only bad planning. But it isn't much nicer, obviously, to be walking on days that are not too hot, not too cold, and not too wet. I think the other where you need to be flexible is with the Margaret River crossings. We spoke briefly about the fact that there were a few river crossings. There are some times in the year where the Margaret River is not able to be crossed, so you need to take a detour. So you need to be flexible and keep an eye on that part of the hike and be prepared to change plans even at the last minute.
If you're out there doing stuff, got to account for the weather, and things can happen quite quickly weather-wise, particularly in the southwest of WA. Did you get all good weather on your...
We were amazingly lucky. So it rained the week before, and then it was fine for our entire week, and then it rained again the week after. The Margaret River we'd been watching really closely because we did want to cross that. That was part of the highlight, and a lot of people talk about crossing the Margaret River. And it only became crossable 2 days before we crossed it. So we just made it in time. We were most of the week planning on doing the alternative route, and then we'd check it each day and decided at the last minute that it would be okay to cross, and it was.
Great to have that opportunity. Was that the highlight, or was there something even better about the...
It was definitely one of the highlights, and I'll hope to talk about it a little bit later, but we actually finished at Margaret River on that crossing. So that was our last few steps, were through the water and up the other side. But I think the other highlights were the wildlife that we saw. So we saw a lot of dolphins, quite a few whales, lots and lots of lizards of all different sizes. Luckily, only one snake, so we were happy with that. The other highlight I think I had was just the different terrain and geography. So walking down past Cozy Corner, you reach a spot called the Blowholes. And I have never in my life seen anything like that. I've seen blowholes in other places, but this was very different. You're walking along the edge of, I think it's granite. I could be wrong because I am not very geologically minded. But the way that the water has eroded those out, and then the sounds of the water coming in underneath you, and as you're stepping across sort of almost stepping stones with the water each side, it was really special.
I don't think I've heard of that. So one day we hope to be able to get along and walk the Cape to Cape as well. So it'd be interesting to find and see that ourselves. That'd be fantastic to do.
It was like nothing I've seen before, so it was really worth it.
We've heard about what it takes to walk the Cape to Cape Trail. Let's have a break now, and after the break, we'll talk about what it means. We've heard what it takes to do the Cape to Cape Trail. Now we'll look at what it means. Sue-Maree, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you're able to walk the Cape to Cape Trail?
I think for me, it brings that connection with nature and the awe and wonder that I always find when I'm out in nature. I love looking at the small details of things sometimes and finding unusual views on very everyday type objects. So it might be a really interesting leaf. It might be a tree that's growing in a really unusual way, or even the fungi, a flower or a cool rock that we might see. So I really enjoy that connection and that moment in time to step away from the busyness of everyday life that we all experience and just to breathe. We know that hiking really promotes mental and physical health and well-being, and I think not just for me, but I think for everyone who does hike, that must be quite a large part of it. And there's that natural ebb and flow, I think, when you're hiking, and I think we spoke about it earlier, where there are the really good moments of hiking and that joy and wonder, but also the times where you're doing a little bit more soul searching. And when you're walking with friends, that is a lovely connection piece as well. There are times when you're walking along chatting about anything and everything. And then just naturally, there'll be other times where everyone's sort of walking alone in their own heads, and that's okay too. And it's a very comfortable place to be, I think. And that means a lot to me to be able to share that with other people.
Going through that process of being together when you're seeing amazing stuff, but then also being together when you're working your way up that hill or up that sand dune, and it seems like it's again and again. Those are very connecting for people who are going through that as a group.
That's right. That shared experience, I think, really is something. And we found that previously. It's so nice to be able to look back on that together. Occasionally a photo will pop up on Facebook as a memory and you can all chat about it. It brings it all back. So it's that connectedness that's really, really valuable, I think.
How much of a record did you keep along the way?
Well, I take a lot of photos, Paul, potentially not as many as you do, but I do take a lot of photos. I was creating reels each day, which was nice. So I'd just pop up at the end of each day a mixture of videos and photos from our day. And I did go back and have another look at those quickly before I came down here. And it was really lovely to see all of those special moments that we had together on those.
Oh, it's so special that you've got a record. That's amazing. When we go out, like for a Sunday morning walk, you take keys, but you leave the phone at home, so you've got nothing to take a photo with or anything like that. You know, while it's a beautiful environment we've got to walk in, to go and do a walk that's in somewhere, I'll say, a bit special and a bit different, then taking a record is really good. And it sounds like you have a great record.
And I think when you're doing a longer walk, so over those 5 days, it's easy for everything to get a bit blurred. Because everything is different, but it's also kind of the same on a walk like that. And so being able to differentiate and remember, oh, that's right, that's the day that we did Bob's Hollow, or that's the day we did this crossing, or that's the day we saw that huge monitor. It is really lovely.
Very special part of your life that hopefully there's a record there for your family in the future as well.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do hope so. So as for what a hike like the Cape to Cape brings to the community, I think it's so important that people can connect with nature. And we're so lucky to have that diversity and such accessibility here as well. There are walks like the Bibbulmun that are amazing, but can be a little bit confronting and difficult for people to access. Whereas the Cape to Cape, generally there are so many access points you can come in and out at any time. So if you just wanted to do an hour or two of hiking, you could do that. If you wanted to do a day or two, you could do that. If you want to do the whole lot, obviously that's an option too. So I think that's a beautiful thing for the community to have access to. But I think it also opens people's eyes to the bigger issues. So the things like we were quite shocked and a little bit horrified by how much plastic rubbish was on some of the beaches and obviously brought in by the tides. So these are beaches that have very little access other than the hikers. And they were literally littered with bottle caps that we would fill our pockets with. There were toothbrushes. There were other very random old plastic that's obviously washed up. So I think being aware of that gives the community more of a reason to be concerned or to be active on topics such as climate change and protection of the environment. So I think that's a good thing that can be brought to the community through hiking. I think there needs to be that balance, though, of not overpopulating an area. And it's really difficult because we love hiking so much and you want to share that love with other people, but getting that balance right by not having thousands and thousands of people tramping through a day. And it's difficult. I don't know how you manage that, but that need to prevent habitat loss. Particularly, I think one of the things that's big on the Cape to Cape is making sure that you're walking below the high tide line, because there are a lot of little birds that actually nest along the beaches, and the damage that can be done to them by hikers, but particularly four-wheel drivers as well, up and down a beach, because they're very hard to see. So I think from a community perspective, it's about getting that balance right, isn't it? About making it available to everybody, but still protecting the environment that we're living in. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's some important balances there between I'll say the volume of space. So we talked earlier about Collie and how there's so many trails out there that a lot of people can be out there and not necessarily even see each other because there are just so many trails. So that gives you a bigger capacity for people to be out there. Because the Cape to Cape's on a relatively narrow strip, isn't it?
It is. Although it was interesting that even though we were in quite a busy time when we were hiking, we didn't tend to come across too many people. I think the fact that the large majority of people do walk from the north end heading south meant that everybody's kind of going in the same way, so you're not crossing a lot of people. And when we did meet hikers who were coming up from the south, it was actually really pleasant to sit and have a little chat, stop for a moment, and then move on. So even though it holds quite a volume of people, you do tend to be walking most of it on your own unless you're near one of the busiest spots. So like Gracetown or Yallingup or one of those more populated areas.
I'll bring it back to parkrun. Everyone at the start is quite close together, but the further you go, the more spread out you get.
That's right.
Travel at different speeds.
Yeah, that's right. So I think even though it could be quite popular, it's very different. If people have done hikes up around Perth, sort of in the John Forrest National Park and things like that, I find there are so many people there and you see them every step of the way, whereas the hikes down here are quite different. And I think because of what you've mentioned, people are sort of all going on the same direction but in different speeds. So you do tend to space out a lot more.
It's a practical thing that you space out, but it's an important consideration for the community to ensure that those places are available and they're of a suitable size that the number of people who want to access it aren't tripping over each other.
That's right. That's what we get out into nature to do, isn't it? To have a bit of time to ourselves and space to ourselves. So definitely.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of meaning that can be gained from hiking the Cape to Cape Trail. We'll have a break now, and after the break, we'll look at how you do it. There's a lot of positive meaning in hiking the Cape to Cape Trail. We'll now look at how you do it. Sue-Maree, if someone wanted to do this, how on earth would they go about it?
So I think with many things, so much of it is in the planning. And I think with the Cape to Cape, 95% of it would be in the planning and probably 5%, if that, would be in the doing. So we started planning probably about 12 months out. As I'd mentioned, or as you had mentioned before, we had a group of friends who had met up for a hike previously. So it was from that same group of friends. So we'd hiked together. We knew what was involved with that. So that did help. On our last hike, there were the 10 of us. This hike, we only had 4 of us. So in some ways, 4 was a little bit easier to organise than 10, particularly as we were more self-managed this time. So we did it all without any tour guides or support. The Cape to Cape is really well supported in that there is an app that you can purchase, which is not too expensive. I think it's under $30. And that has pretty much everything you'll need to know about the Cape to Cape. It has all of the maps, it has access points, it has recommended things to do along the way. So we purchased the app, and then you can also get guidebooks and maps. So between the four of us, we had all of those things covered, which all of them came in use at one stage or another. The other thing that you will need if you're planning on doing the Cape to Cape or any hiking really is obviously the right equipment and the right safety gear. And the equipment is going to depend very much on how you're doing the hike and what you're used to walking in. So we all walked in trail shoes, which are much lighter than boots, but we saw people walking in a whole range of different things. So from boots to regular running shoes, to hiking sandals, to Crocs on one certain part of it. I probably wouldn't recommend the Crocs, but if that's what works for you, then go right ahead. We also made sure that we had a PLB, so a personal locator beacon. Most of the trail is covered by phone coverage, but not all. I believe about 20% has no coverage. So it's very important, particularly because there are snakes out there. It's not that difficult to imagine a situation where you could roll an ankle and not be able to get out or hurt yourself in some other way. So I think the PLB was a really useful addition and an essential addition to have. And then just a really basic first aid kit is necessary too, just with a snake bandage, something maybe to deal with a sprain or two and a blister or two. I'm pleased to say that we actually didn't need to use our first aid kit except on one section, which was a more populated section. And we actually came across a little family who were heading to look at the falls, and their 4-year-old had fallen over and hurt his knee. So I was able to be, super prepared, whip out my first aid kit and gave them some antiseptic swabs to clean off his knee. He was less excited about the antiseptic swab being put on his knee, and the poor kid, when his mum was saying, say thank you to the lady, you could see that in his mind the last thing he wanted to do was thank me for making his knee feel worse. But pleasingly, that was the only time we needed to use the first aid kit, but it was good to have.
So just coming back to the personal locator beacon, you had one amongst the group?
We just had the one. Usually that's enough, particularly if you are staying together as a group.
And where do you get them?
I think most hiking shops, you can get them online. My husband actually bought me mine online, so I'm not completely sure, but it's about, I think they're around $300. And you can have a whole lot of different options. So some will send texts, some will just send the emergency signal. Some you need to have linked up as an ongoing subscription service. The one I've got is literally just a use when you need it, sends a signal to the emergency services. And again, pleased to say I haven't had to use it, but there's also no subscription and I don't need to turn it on and off as far as when I want to use it. It's just there in my bag. I just put the aerial up, press the button if I need it. So hopefully that will be enough to keep us safe.
Or at least make the call for help if you need it.
That's right. Absolutely. So it is that added peace of mind for not just for us, but also for our family, I think.
All right. So if someone wants to, there's a whole world of research they can do on it.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot that you can look into, or just handball that off to your husband like I did. So if you're planning on doing the Cape to Cape, the other thing to really consider is when you're going to do it. So you can walk at any time of the year, although there are obviously considerations to be made about the temperature, about the weather. Most people do tend to walk it either in autumn or spring. We chose spring for a few reasons. It fitted in with the timing that we could all get off work. It also fitted in with a running event that was supposed to be happening in Collie that my friends were going to come over and do. And it was the wildflower season. So if you have any interest in orchids or wildflowers, it's a good time to be down on the track to look at that. As we mentioned before, though, you need to take into consideration what the rivers are likely to be doing. So obviously through winter, they're going to be a lot higher. With one of the rivers, there's not an alternative route. So if you can't cross the river there, you basically can't continue on. But I think generally that can be fairly crossable most of the year, but potentially be aware of that if you're looking at going in winter or after there's been a lot of rain. And as I said, Margaret River does get very fast and very deep. And so you need to be watching that. There is a Facebook page purely dedicated to the Margaret River mouth and lets you know each day about whether it's crossable or not. And when we crossed it, it was probably just under hip height. But it was still quite fast, and we probably wouldn't have wanted it to be any deeper. The other thing you need to consider when you're going to walk the Cape to Cape is how you would like to do it. So as I've mentioned before, most people do tend to walk from north to south. We decided to do it a little bit differently in that we still did walk north to south, but we started at Prevelly. So that's where we'd booked our accommodation. So we'd booked an Airbnb for the week. So we just started to start in Prevelly and walk down to Cape Leeuwin. So that was 3 days of walking. And then we circled back up to Cape Naturalist and walked back down to Prevelly. So as I mentioned before, we actually finished at the Margaret River mouth. And there are a few reasons that we did that, including the fact that, as you would, I dare say, agree, Paul, parkrun being on a Saturday was something that we didn't want to miss, and Margaret River parkrun is pretty amazing. So we didn't want to be trying to fit in parkrun on our last day and then still have a 25-kilometre hike and a 40-minute drive to get there. So by finishing at Margaret River, we had a shorter walk on our last day, could easily fit in parkrun and make it the later start and enjoy our day in that way. It also meant that we could get to Ellensbrook House on a day that it would be open. So that's a historic house on the northern end of the walk, and it's only open certain days. So we wanted to make sure that as we were walking through, that was a day that it was open because, as I've mentioned, my friends were visiting and they were only having one shot, really, at getting to see it. So I think plan how you want to do the walk and what you want to fit in. Don't feel like there's only one way to do it.
I was of the impression that it was basically walked from south to north. And I don't know why, I've just sort of got that impression. But clearly there's multiple different ways to do it. And there's a lot of flexibility there as well with so many access points.
There really is, that's right. And some people do walk south to north. I think the wind is often better if you do that way. So you're walking against the wind, not into it. But having walked the way we did, I'm fully aware that there are 365 steps down into one of the valleys and no steps coming up if you go that way. Whereas if you're coming up the other way, that's a lot of steps in front of you. We also found that there were quite a few really deep sand dunes that we felt we were going down, and we on each of those would comment to you, please, we're not going up these. There were still a few that we did have to climb, but there seemed to be less. So my preference, I think, would be heading southbound, but everybody's different.
Depends on what you want to get out of it. Like if you just love that challenge of getting up soft sand dunes, then
that's a challenge nobody needs, Paul. So as I mentioned, we'd booked at Prevelly. Now you can camp on the Cape to Cape, and many people do. They consider that to be part of the charm, is to be carrying a full pack. I'm a little more precious than that. I don't fancy carrying anything more than a day pack if I can avoid it, and I do like a bed. So as I mentioned, we had rented an Airbnb for the week in Prevelly. We had 2 cars and a support crew, and that support crew was my parents, who very kindly came down and stayed with us. My friend's mother had also come over with them. And so she did sort of 5 to 10 kilometres each day with us, and then she'd get picked up. And being Margaret River and the region, it meant that there were so many things that they could go and do themselves in that time while we were hiking. So they would drop us off at the start, leave the second car where we'd planned to finish, and then they'd go and enjoy their day. That worked really well. But you don't need to do that. We ran into a few people who were just hiking on their own with 2 cars. So they would both drive to the end, leave one car there, drive back to the start, walk down, pick up the car and drive back. So there's a little bit more shuffling, but you can certainly do it if you don't have a support crew. And then there's also a lot of options, I think, for people to do shuttles and things in Margaret River. And again, on the Facebook page, you can find out how to access those services. But there are definitely services that will pick you up and drop you off each day if that's how you want to do it.
On some of our drives up to Perth, up the Forest Highway, there's definitely a Cape to Cape tour bus that goes from Buston or Yellingup or somewhere up to Perth and back at least on a somewhat regular frequency.
I think so. And I think there are a lot of tours that you can do, and they're guided tours often. We did come across a few of those, and I suppose that's a nice option particularly if you don't have a group of friends who are wanting to do it. If you're wanting to do it and aren't comfortable doing the whole thing on your own, then a tour would be a great option. And I think there's a lot of variety in the tours as well, as if in regards to if you are staying on track or if you are staying in slightly nicer accommodation. So there are options out there. Just do your research. But so much of it is on that Facebook page or in the books.
So in reality, you can pretty much make the hike and all the logistics around the hike whatever you feel suits you best.
You really can. That's right. And as I mentioned, my friend's mother walked with us most days. There was only one day that we couldn't find an access point about that 5 to 10K in to get her picked up. So there was only one day she didn't do at least part of the walk with us. So there are many, many options and you can make it work for you. So each evening we'd sit down as a group and we'd pore over our maps and our books and we'd see what we were going to do the next day and make sure that we could fit in all of the points of interest. And I think it's important to consider your timing. So we probably allowed an extra hour and a half to 2 hours on what we would normally do in just a morning hike, because there's going to be a lot of times where you just want to sit and take in the view or stop and have a lovely morning tea with whatever you've packed, looking out over at the beach, or sit and have half an hour for lunch. Whereas when we normally would hike just on a regular weekend, we wouldn't allow for that. So allow time to soak it in and not be rushed. I think that's important. And then, as we mentioned before, deciding on how many days that you've got and you want to allow. I think allowing an extra day in your schedule is probably a really good thing in case there is terrible weather, or in case for whatever reason you just feel like you need a break midway through. So we had allowed an extra day, which in the end we were able to use as just a pure touristing day through the Margaret River region, which was nice. But I think it is important to give yourself options.
Yeah, allow that flexibility at least to adjust on the fly if needed and relax, I guess.
That's right. And it's such a beautiful area that you'll find something to do if you don't need to use that day hiking.
So for each day, what did you actually take with you from an equipment perspective?
Sure. So each day we would have our day pack, which is just a really light little hiking pack. We would make sure we had enough water. So you want at least 2 litres of water, probably a little more if it's hot weather. We were getting through with about 2 litres. We would then make sure that we had enough sustenance because, as I mentioned previously, the sitting down and eating and taking in the view is very important. So we'd learnt from our previous hike that generally a muffin or a biscuit, one of those decent ones, not just a little biscuit, but one of those nice big ones for the bakery.
Not a baby one, a big
No, you need a little bit of sustenance. And a piece of fruit is great for morning tea. And then generally we'd just take a roll that we'd make up in the morning for lunch, and then sort of some dried fruit or some nuts or something else just to keep us going. Equipment-wise, we made sure that we all had hiking poles, and I think that's a really important option for this hike. As I mentioned, the terrain is so different, and there is quite a lot of scrambling up and down over rocks and things, and it's often really nice just to have that extra little bit of stability. So I definitely recommend the hiking poles, and then the first aid kit, the PLB, and we would also take an extra layer of clothing. So usually just a jacket to throw over the top. We had sunscreen in because it's surprising, even though it was September and it was very mild, the weather, it's amazing how quickly you can still burn, particularly down along those exposed cliff tops. So make sure that you've got plenty of sun protection, be that long sleeves, hats, and sunscreen. And I think that is probably the basis of, and of course our maps and or phones, because we did use those a lot. The Cape to Cape's quite well marked, but there are a few spots, particularly going off the beaches. It's difficult to see because obviously with erosion and things like that, some of the markers can get lost and buried. So definitely take a phone and or your map with you.
I'm sort of picturing there climbing up a sand dune in the desert, and they all look the same.
Some of it wasn't far off that at times. Absolutely, it did. And some of the beaches were sort of 6 kilometres of walking, and you're not quite sure exactly which point you're exiting. So yeah, it can be useful to have a map, particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. And potentially, the phone would have a GPS for most of it.
So the app on the phone is actually, unfortunately, it took me 2 days to realise this, but once you're on the trail, you can click on any point and it will let you know how far you are from that point, how many kilometres you still have to go, and it will show you if you go off track as well. But also if you've got an app like All Trails, I know a lot of people use that has the Cape to Cape and will keep you on track as well.
There's a whole world of apps out there that you can explore as well by the sound of that.
Allegedly so.
I know from a camping perspective, there are things like Wikicamps and things like that, and there's a few other ones that help you explore the area that you're in. Sounds like hiking has similar options available.
Yeah, there are many options out there if you go looking. It's a bit of a deep dive sometimes.
Well, thank you very much, Sue-Maree, for coming and having a chat about hiking the Cape to Cape Trail. Nice to have you on the podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you. And all our Forest.chat listeners wish you all the best in your future endeavours. Pretty sure you've got another hike in the planning somewhere.
Well, we're thinking about heading out to Larapinta next, which is out from Alice Springs. So we'll see how that one goes.
That sounds another entirely new adventure in the desert.
It will be different.
You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia. What it takes, what it means, and how you do it. In today's episode, we talked with Sue-Maree Wilks about hiking the Cape to Cape Trail. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your family and friends and people you meet. If you subscribe to the emails, you get advance notice of the episodes. To listen to the episodes, go to forest.chat/episodes. If you do something that other people may find interesting, book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a local business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next episode. Until then, enjoy making it happen.